Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Tonight, you're about to drift through the golden halls, echoing chapels, and rustling silks of Bourbon, France. You'll travel gently through time, from the first Bourbon crown in 1589 to the final bow of monarchy before the Revolution. This will not be a tale of war drums and bloodshed, but a soft unfurling of centuries, where court gossip drips like candle wax and royal footsteps echo faintly on polished marble floors. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about your favourite historical moment, and subscribe to keep these soothing tales coming your way. Let us know where in the world and in which time zone you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let these gentle whispers of history lull you into sleep. You awaken in the summer of 1589. The warm air smells of rosemary and iron. France trembles, not with war, but with relief. A long era of religious bloodshed is slowly quieting. You find yourself standing beneath a tattered canopy, somewhere between the end of one century and the birth of another, watching a man named Henri of Navarre, take the crown of a deeply fractured realm. He is not supposed to be king, not by anyone's original plan, but lineage, luck, and war have cleared a brutal path. France, scorched by decades of religious civil war, watches its new monarch, a Protestant turned Catholic, ascend a throne stained with uncertainty. Some Parisian pamphleteers whisper that he converted not out of faith, but out of pragmatism. Paris, Henri is said to have shrugged, is well worth a mass. This moment, quiet and sun-dappled, hides the tension like a ribbon tied too tightly. The crown placed upon Henri's head feels heavier than gold. Around you, banners flap nervously. A few courtiers wipe their brows and glance sidelong at the church. Others smile too quickly. And still, others mutter that this Bourbon king will never last. But you know something they do not. Henri IV will last. And not just last, he will thrive. He will charm France with a style all his own. He rides through the countryside not in parades, but alone and in disguise, listening to the people. He jokes with farmers, eats their stew, learns their grief. He famously wishes that every peasant might one day have a chicken in their pot on Sundays, a dream both touching and oddly specific. Henri is no marble statue of kingship. He is flesh and mud and grit. He loves deeply, fathers many children, laughs too loudly at court, and sometimes smells of the road. But the people, at least many of them, love him back. Even so, history resists neat portraits. Some argue that Henri was more playboy than politician, more improviser than reformer. His policies, especially the Edict of Nantes, granting limited rights to Protestants, were clever, but fragile. Historians still debate whether his peace was built on compromise or on exhaustion. Was he truly a peacemaker, or merely the last man standing after the storm? None of this troubles your dreamlike stroll through the early Bourbon court. You linger near a window of the Palais du Louvre, where the King's Council meets. Outside, the Seine glimmers. Inside, voices rise and fall like a distant tide. The walls are warm with sunlight and painted with symbols of unity, lilies, olive branches, and occasionally a small chicken. At night, Henri dines with poets. He plays cards with foreign ambassadors. He builds, mends, jokes, and listens. Even his enemies, grudgingly, admire him. He's not the most pious, nor the most regal, but he is real. And when the candle gutters low in your hand, You walk the hallways of a France newly stitched together, stitched not perfectly, not tightly, but just enough to hold. It is the beginning of something long and winding. The Bourbon name is now stitched into the fabric of France, and in the hush of this evening moment, you can already hear the slow, sonorous heartbeat of centuries to come. You awaken to the sound of a horse's gentle snort and the muffled crunch of hooves on dirt. It's early morning in the French countryside, and you find yourself beneath the low eaves of a modest farmhouse. Henri IV is already awake, though the people here have no idea their guest is the king, dressed in simple clothes, with only a hint of velvet betraying his rank. He's broken his journey to speak with the people he governs. It's one of his favourite pastimes, slipping into villages incognito to hear stories, complaints, and weather gossip over fresh cheese and barley stew. Henri listens as a farmer laments the loss of hens to a fox, as a mother begs for grain relief during this year's lean harvest. He laughs gently with a carpenter about the recent price of nails. He offers no sweeping proclamations, just nods and notes, and then, once the bread is eaten and the tankard emptied, he disappears into the road again, leaving only the memory of a charming stranger with a nose for salt pork. This is the Henri of the fields. Not the marble bust or the royal portrait, but the man with dirt under his fingernails and calluses from rains. The story of his chicken in every pot speech may never have been written down by him. Some historians say it was a later invention, a bit of legend painted onto the canvas of memory. But whether he said it or not, the sentiment stuck. It became shorthand for a king who saw his subjects not just as taxpayers, but as people who deserved warmth, food, and quiet dignity. He knows France is tired. The wars of religion may be over, but the bruises remain. So he mends roads, lowers taxes for the poor, and re-establishes trade. Slowly, with the patience of someone who has seen too much death, he nudges France into a fragile peace. But not everyone is pleased. You notice, as you drift through the Louvre's candlelit halls, the gritted teeth of old nobles. Many have lost land, others have lost influence. Some see Henri as too soft on Protestants, others as too French, too rustic, too ready to kneel to Rome. They whisper, they scheme. And one morning in 1610, as the king's carriage slows in a narrow street, an assassin named François Ravaillac climbs onto the wheel and plunges a knife into Henri's chest. The scene blurs before your eyes, not from blood, but from silence. The crowds do not scream. They freeze. They blink in disbelief. It is as though the sun has been snuffed out in mid-morning. Henri dies in the street, and France mourns like a widow. His death sparks fresh waves of anxiety. His son, Louis VI, is just 9 years old. A boy with pale cheeks, solemn eyes, and a throne far too large for him. His mother, Marie de Medici, steps in as regent, but she is mistrusted, seen as a foreign influence with Italian tastes and Florentine ambitions. Her court grows crowded with advisors and favourites. The old calm is cracking again, and yet, amid this uneasy transition, one thing remains Henri's legacy of common care. Even those who disliked his politics admit he tried to feed the nation. He rode without guards. He laughed too easily. He danced with children at harvest festivals. Some said he smelled faintly of cider and wax. Others claimed he never removed his boots indoors. None of it mattered, because he made France feel, at least briefly, like a family. You step now into one of his old chapels. long since repainted. There's a carved chicken in the corner, barely visible beneath layers of gold. You smile. Whether myth or truth, the image endures. And as you lie back, your head nestled among the soft hush of velvet history, the echo of Henri's voice still lingers. One day, my people shall eat well and sleep safely. You awaken beneath painted beams and the faint perfume of incense. It is the early 1610s, and the royal court has shifted tone. Henri IV is gone, and the realm now bows to a boy king, Louis III, just a child when crowned, quiet and watchful behind heavy curtains and taller voices. You find yourself in the softly lit halls of the Palais du Luxembourg, where his mother, Marie de Medici, reigns as regent in both title and temperament. She is formidable, Florentine, refined, politically ambitious, and often surrounded by Italian advisors who stir unease among the older French nobility. The young king walks quietly behind her, his footsteps barely heard beneath her shadow. You see him clutch a small prayer book, his fingers nervous around the edges. Though France bows to him, the reins of power lie elsewhere, tangled among courtiers, bishops, foreign intrigue, and a growing swirl of internal factions. Still, he is learning. At night, when the corridors of the palace go still, and the echo of courtly conversation fades to nothing, Louis XIII reads by candlelight. He studies Latin, listens to music, and practices his swordsmanship in private. He finds solace in birds and theatre. A pet falcon perches near his window, tethered gently, eyes alert even when he sleeps. Among his earliest political gestures is the ousting of his mother's favourite, Concino Concini, an Italian noble who had grown far too powerful for France's liking. At just 16, Louis orchestrates Concini's arrest and execution in a single act. Quiet, Louis proves that he is no puppet. The court is stunned. His mother is exiled. The real reign of Louis XIII has begun, but he is not alone. From the shadow steps, a figure who will come to define this era, Cardinal Richelieu, tall, crimson-robed, and cunning, he becomes the king's chief minister. Where Louis hesitates, Richelieu acts. Where Louis ponders, Richelieu plots. Their relationship is not warm, but it is effective. Together, they centralize power, suppress rebellious nobles, and challenge the old feudal networks. Richelieu's vision is clear, a France ruled by monarchy, not by a patchwork of powerful dukes or bishops. Still, not everyone agrees with his methods. Historians debate whether Richelieu strengthened France or strangled it. Was he a master of diplomacy or a cold-handed autocrat? Some whisper that he crushed the Huguenots too cruelly. Others argue he preserved France from collapse. The truth, as ever, floats somewhere between those candle flames. You now stroll through a gallery of portraits painted during Louis's reign. His face appears again and again, solemn, lean, lightly melancholic. He does not laugh like his father. He rarely dances. His robes are elegant but stiff, his gaze focused but distant. Yet he loves music, especially compositions by his court composer, Jean-Baptiste Boesset. You pause beside a lutenist playing softly in a corner chamber, imagining the king seated just out of view, nodding gently to the rhythm. And while Louis XIII is not a passionate king, he is a dutiful one. France, during his rule, grows more stable. Its army modernizes. Its economy, though still unequal, steadies. and behind each signature on each royal decree is a man who prefers action to applause. In one quiet moment, you overhear a servant at court telling another that the king prefers solitude to ceremony. He eats simply. He avoids large banquets. He loves walking beneath the trees when no one is watching. Another adds, with a chuckle, that Louis can never decide whether he prefers politics or pigeons. And in the quietude of his later reign, that duality remains. As you step into a small chapel built during these years, you notice a detail others miss. A stone carving of a falcon, wings half unfurled, hidden near the eaves. It's a modest tribute to a boy who became king in silence, ruled with caution, and left behind a France better prepared for the grandeur that would follow. For just beyond the candlelight, a new sun is beginning to rise. You awaken to the faint sound of quills scratching parchment. The court has moved again, this time not geographically, but ideologically. You're in the heart of the 1620s now, where red silk drapes the corridors and the presence of Cardinal Richelieu grows unmistakable. He moves like a force of nature through the royal halls, precise, unsmiling, always planning 3 steps ahead. While Louis XIII remains king, the rhythm of power now echoes in Richelieu's footsteps. You find yourself in a long gallery of the Palais Royal, where sunlight filters through latticed windows. Louis XIII walks beside his minister, listening more than he speaks. It's an odd pair, the introspective monarch and the confident cardinal, yet the kingdom depends on their cooperation. Richelieu's goals are straightforward: eliminate domestic dissent and elevate France on the European stage. He strengthens the monarchy, weakens the old feudal lords, and curtails the influence of Protestants, especially those within fortified cities. His siege of La Rochelle, a Protestant stronghold, lasts over a year and ends in surrender, hunger, and sorrow. Yet Richelieu presents it as a victory for unity. The court is uneasy with such harshness. Some nobles begin muttering, a few flee, one even attempts assassination. But Richelieu survives them all, unruffled. His enemies underestimate his talent for political theatre. You witness one morning when the cardinal stages a walk through a Paris market, stopping to buy pears while casually dictating policy to a frightened aide. It's all carefully curated, a show of calm amid chaos. In private, Louis XIII suffers the loneliness of kingship. He distrusts many, including his own courtiers. At times, he retreats for days, speaking only to a few trusted servants or his confessor. You sense he enjoys small, predictable things: feeding birds, organizing tapestries, composing short melodies on the harpsichord, and then, one snowy afternoon in 1638, a miracle. After more than 20 years of marriage to Anne of Austria, Louis becomes a father. The child, Louis Dieudonné, gift of God, is born amid bells and cheers. The court rejoices, though some whisper the child's birth is too convenient. Could Anne have been unfaithful? Historians still debate the timeline, analysing letters and diaries for hints of scandal. But no matter the truth, the boy is declared legitimate and heir to the throne, and so the future glimmers, small, pink-cheeked, wrapped in brocade, and blissfully unaware of the throne awaiting him. Richelieu, ever the tactician, ensures this child's inheritance is protected. He quells fresh revolts, tightens administrative control, and continues to maneuver France through the complexities of the 30 Years' War. Under his direction, France shifts alliances, first Catholic, then siding with Protestant states, all in the name of weakening Habsburg Spain. You drift through a war council chamber where maps lie scattered like autumn leaves. Richelieu circles cities with a quill dipped in blood-coloured ink. He does not enjoy war, you sense, but he views it as necessary. France, he believes, must be strong before it can be merciful. In a quiet alcove, you stumble upon a half-finished portrait of Richelieu. The artist has painted his eyes too kindly. He's correcting it now, sharpening the gaze. It's a subtle shift, but one that captures the cardinal's essence sharp, exacting, always alert. By 1642, Richelieu's health begins to fail. He coughs often, his hands tremble. Yet he continues working, dictating letters from bed, issuing orders through barely parted lips. When he dies later that year, even his enemies concede his genius. As you leave the room where he breathed his last, you hear a servant murmur, "He ruled more than any king," and perhaps he did. Louis XIV follows him in death less than a year later. Their bond, complex and unequal, ends in silence. The crown now belongs to a child not yet 5 years old, Louis Dieudonné, the future Sun King. France, once again, holds its breath. You awaken to the soft creak of wooden floors and the nervous flutter of pages in a drafty nursery. It is 1643 and you're in the presence of a child king. Louis XIV is just 4 years old. Still more curls than crown, when the crown is placed figuratively upon his head. Too young to rule, too watched to be free. He moves through the early corridors of power under the careful eye of his mother, Queen Anne of Austria. The world around him stirs with quiet uncertainty. Anne serves as regent, but it is Cardinal Mazarin, Richelieu's cunning successor, who steers the ship of state. You watch him enter rooms like a breeze behind velvet drapes, all soft voice and subtle pressure. He is no warrior, no grand reformer, but he is patient, diplomatic, and endlessly charming. Louis grows up amid courtiers who bow too quickly and whisper too much. He watches everything. A governess once writes that he speaks little, but his eyes miss nothing. At night, you walk the candlelit halls of the Palais Royal, where Louis sleeps in a gilded bed beneath painted cherubs. He dreams, it's said, of oceans and marble. He plays with toy soldiers made of ivory and silk, unaware that soon real soldiers will rise in his name, and sometimes against it. By the time he is 7, the kingdom begins to fracture. The Fronde, a series of civil uprisings fueled by resentment of royal taxes and court excess, erupts across France. First, the Parlement, France's legal institutions, resist Mazarin. Then, the nobility joins in, each with their own ambitions. Streets in Paris grow tense. Aristocrats hire private armies. Children, including young Louis, are forced to flee the capital more than once under cover of night. One evening, you sit silently beside his nurse as she tries to soothe him. The future Sun King clutches a small cushion, silent, while rioters outside chant and bang drums. Later, he will say these memories shaped him more than any tutor. He learns, early, that power not projected is power at risk. The court lives in exile for months, sometimes huddled in cold provincial castles, always watching the horizon for smoke or cavalry. The young king watches his mother hold council in a frozen hall, her fingers stiff with cold, her voice steady. He sees that royalty, for all its robes and ceremony, can be frighteningly fragile. Historians still debate the Fronde's true nature. Was it a noble uprising? A conservative reaction? a revolution thwarted too early to succeed. Its goals were inconsistent, its alliances confused. But for Louis, it solidified one truth: he would never again allow nobles to dictate the rhythm of the realm. When peace is restored, and the court returns to Paris, Louis returns not as a child, but as a watcher, a planner. He begins to construct an image of kingship that cannot be questioned, not merely a ruler, but a symbol. You drift beside him during a small court performance. Music and ballet swirl around him, and you see the joy it brings him. The boy is enchanted by the idea of grandeur, of ceremony, of light arranged into order. He dances too. At 13, he appears in court ballets, costumed as Apollo, god of the sun. It is not just theatre, it is prophecy. The young Louis is taught Latin, history, statecraft. He is shown how to read ledgers and sign edicts, but it's the art of presence he seems to study most. How to enter a room, how to make silence feel deliberate, how to wear the crown like a second face. And while Mazarin continues to rule in fact, Louis begins to prepare in spirit. One chilly morning in 1661, Cardinal Mazarin dies. Louis, now 22, gathers his council. You stand quietly at the edge of the room as he speaks, for perhaps the first time, with full authority. "I will govern alone," he says. The ministers blink. One drops a quill. This moment marks the end of ministerial rule and the beginning of something dazzling and terrifying. Louis XIV, the Sun King, will now shine with no shade beside him. And in that dawning glow, France prepares to orbit around a single will. You awaken to the scent of damp earth and sawdust. It's spring, not in a ballroom, but on a vast, muddy plain outside Paris. There, under pale grey skies, men dig trenches and haul stones. This is Versailles, not the palace yet, but the promise of one. You walk slowly between carts and scaffolding as Louis XIV's vision begins to rise from the ground like a golden mirage. At first, Versailles was only a hunting lodge, modest, rustic, surrounded by swampland and buzzing flies. But now, it will become the seat of something much larger, the physical embodiment of absolute monarchy. Brick by brick, pond by pond, the king's dream of control, grandeur, and sunlight is made manifest. You see the labourers, thousands of them, shaping marble, draining marshes, and hauling fountains into position. Their sweat mingles with the smell of plaster and algae. It is said that no expense is spared. Oranges are imported to fill the orangery. Mirrors, rare and dazzling, are commissioned to line the future hall of mirrors. But construction is never quick. Over decades, Versailles will expand, transform, and crystallize into the jewel of Europe. And all the while, Louis is watching. He visits the site regularly, measuring distances, approving gardens, altering facades. This is not delegation, it is design. A palace where everything, from the way light falls through the windows to the precise sound of water in a basin, is part of the king's choreography. You follow him one morning through a corridor of scaffolding. He's dressed in fine boots, though mud clings to the hem. An architect stumbles as he describes a new colonnade. Louis gently corrects him, referring to Vitruvian symmetry in the recent sketches sent from Rome. The king is not merely attending, he is directing. At court, whispers spread. Why move the court away from Paris? Why sink endless gold into a swamp? The answers are subtle. Louis remembers the Fronde. He remembers nobles defying royal authority. At Versailles, He will centralize not just government, but attention. Here, courtiers will live under his gaze, dancing, dining, and petitioning, all within walls he controls. Some historians debate whether Versailles was built out of grandeur or paranoia. Was it a stage or a snare, a symbol of confidence or of the king's deep distrust? The answer, as usual, lies somewhere between. You pass through the early gardens, now beginning to bloom. Fountains spray delicately into the air, each one fed by an increasingly complex web of pumps and aqueducts. The engineering is extraordinary and temperamental. One servant later jokes that fountains only worked when the king approached, thanks to a system of hidden signals and hasty valve turning. Inside the lodge, not yet a palace, gilded panelling is slowly installed. You brush your fingers against one of the early tapestries. It depicts Apollo in his chariot, rays of light flaring from his crown. The message is clear: Louis is the Sun King, and all France turns toward his warmth. Not everyone is charmed. You overhear one lady-in-waiting whisper that Versailles is too far from the city, too full of insects, too damp for fashion. A nobleman grumbles that his quarters are no bigger than a hunting kennel. Yet they remain, because to be at court is to matter, and to matter is to be seen by the king. At night, the lodge glows with lanterns and soft harpsichord music. Guests dance on unfinished floors. Louis himself sometimes takes the lead, dressed in embroidered silk and moving with the grace of someone who knows all eyes are upon him. In the distance, Paris waits, half jealous, half forgotten. But out here in the fields of Versailles, something new is being born. Not just a building, but a system. A palace where power is performed. A court where sunlight never dims, because it comes not from nature, but from the king himself. You awaken before dawn to the rustle of silk and the faint crackle of fire. It is morning in Versailles, not just any morning, but the royal morning, when the king awakens and the court begins to orbit. You find yourself within the golden shell of the Grand Appartement du Roi. The sky outside is still pale with sleep, but already a ritual is underway. It is called the lever, the royal rising, part ceremony, part politics, and entirely performance. Attendants file in with practiced silence. First come the valets, then noblemen, then bishops and dukes, each summoned in ranks of importance. Louis XIV lies in bed like a statue still half carved from gold, feigning slumber until the appointed moment. Then, slowly, he opens his eyes. A quiet murmur passes through the gathered courtiers. You watch as the ceremony unfolds in stages. A servant draws the curtains. Another presents the shirt. A third offers holy water. Louis speaks sparingly, nodding once, allowing the machinery of presence to dress him. Every gesture, every thread, from his lace cuffs to his red-heeled shoes, is imbued with meaning. To be invited to pass him his gloves or buckle his sash is not a favour. It is a privilege, a rung on the ladder of proximity to power. The ritual continues through breakfast and mass, through a slow promenade through the gardens, until the business of the day begins. Ministers line up for meetings, dancers prepare for evening ballets, petitioners rehearse their bows, and all the while, Louis remains calm, deliberate, composed. You notice he rarely raises his voice. His control is not loud, it is gravitational. He is the still point, and everything else moves in slow, reverent orbit. It is said that he reads reports from every province in France, sometimes correcting errors in the margins in his own neat hand. He signs letters, commissions artists, inspects troop deployments, and still finds time to learn new dance steps. This morning, a violinist practices in the antechamber, filling the air with gentle notes from a Lully composition. Louis's foot taps faintly in rhythm, almost unconsciously. Yet even here, amid perfection, there are flaws. He suffers from gout, from dental problems, from a persistent need for medical treatments that reflect the limits of 17th century science. You pass the apothecary's chambers and see rows of syrups, leeches, powders, and foul-smelling tinctures, all administered to keep the Sun King shining. His doctors argue constantly. Should the king be bled, purged, leeched, historians still debate whether these treatments did more harm than good. Yet Louis submits to them with a kind of fatalistic patience. He believes in order, and order must include suffering. At court, fashion changes daily. One duke obsesses over wig height. A duchess faints dramatically when denied a glimpse of the king's lunch. These people live not for governance, but for performance. Versailles has become not just a palace, but a theatre, and everyone is both actor and audience. You slip into the king's private study, where a painting hangs of him as Apollo. His gaze meets yours. He does not smile. He does not need to. Even alone, the role continues. Still, there are moments, rare and quiet, when the mask slips. One evening you find him in the gardens, walking alone after sunset. No courtiers, no musicians, no ceremony, just a man in a cloak beneath a canopy of stars. He pauses near a marble fountain, watches the water trickle over a carved lion's paw, and sighs, long, low, and real. For all the gilded walls and choreographed mornings, the weight of kingship is not so light, and yet, tomorrow, at the first light of day, he will rise again, the lever will resume, and France, its ministers, its poets, its powdered elite, will gather once more to witness the dawn of a king who never forgets to be seen as to rule. You awaken to the shimmer of candlelight reflecting in glass. It is the late 1660s now, and Versailles no longer squats in the mud. It gleams. Its walls ripple with gilded carvings and mirrored surfaces that bounce light from one chamber to the next. You walk through the hall of mirrors as servants polish its panels with cloth soaked in vinegar and lavender. Every reflection is part of a message. The king sees everything, and he himself is seen from every angle. This is the age of peak Louis XIV, not yet old, still dancing, still dazzling and fully in control. His wars are frequent, his banquets exquisite, and his image cultivated with meticulous care. The palace is no longer just a home, it is a machine, a clock whose ticking is measured in footsteps, fan flourishes, and symphonies. You pause at a grand feast in the Galerie des Glaces. Gold utensils glint beneath candle chandeliers. A diplomat from Sweden stares slack-jawed as a roasted peacock is carried in, feathers intact, its beak dipped in saffron. A violinist plays a mournful air as champagne bubbles in crystal goblets. It's not just indulgence. This is strategy. Louis entertains to dominate. The ambassadors will go home dazzled. The nobles will stay close, fattened on favours and wine. No one leaves Versailles without remembering who reigns here. Yet even as fountains bloom and marble shines, armies march. Louis's wars begin to multiply: the War of Devolution, the Dutch War, the War of the Reunions. His reasons are complex, some legal, some territorial, some personal. He seeks natural borders for France, a phrase that echoes like justification. Others suspect it's simply ambition in fine clothing. You step through a war room filled with maps and pins. Generals bow deeply. Reports arrive from Flanders, from Alsace, from the Rhine. Victories are celebrated with ballets, defeats with silence. Historians still argue whether these wars strengthened France or drained it. Were they defensive, as Louis claimed, or expansionist? Was he preserving glory or chasing it? The answer, as so often, depends on which mirror you're standing in front of. Even amid war, Louis builds. The palace expands again. New wings appear like golden vines. The fountains dance longer. Architects are summoned weekly. Water engineers labour to divert rivers, build aqueducts, feed Versailles' thirst. One engineer mutters as he sketches a new plan. The king commands water to flow uphill. He's only half joking. Artists, too, flourish. Painters immortalize battles. Poets recite victories in long odes. Musicians compose symphonies that begin with trumpet blasts and end with harpsichords. Louis, an accomplished dancer himself, stages performances in which he plays gods, most often Apollo, still. You follow him to a private performance in the marble courtyard, where dancers glide by torchlight and the king nods from his balcony, face still as a mask. Later, he walks alone among the statues. You hear him speak to his reflection in a pool. I am the state. It is not arrogance. It is doctrine. He believes it, because France believes it too. Still, all is not perfectly smooth. His court is a place of quiet rivalries. One noblewoman complains that her invitation to a royal supper was delivered an hour too late. A scandal. A duke suspects his cousin of receiving an extra inch of velvet in his ceremonial robe. Etiquette is currency, and even glancing at the king in the wrong moment can ruin you. But Louis does not waver. In every performance, every decree, every garden path, he orchestrates perfection. To him, rule is not negotiation, it is expression. He does not argue, he stages. He does not beg, he beams. And Versailles becomes, under his vision, not just the heart of France, but its sun. You awaken beneath vaulted ceilings and the murmurs of 1,000 courtly voices. Versailles is now complete, a dazzling maze of salons, galleries, and manicured gardens. It is no longer a place to live. It is a place to be seen. Every corridor buzzes with whispers, not of statecraft or taxes, but of glances, bows, lace, and laughter. You walk among the courtiers, brushing against brocade sleeves and powdered wigs, as the game of status begins anew with each rising sun. Here, at the glittering centre of Louis XIV's reign, etiquette is everything. The rules are dizzying: how to address the king depending on the room, how to hold a teacup without offence, how many steps behind him to walk. A misstep in posture or protocol can mean exclusion, or worse, banishment from court. You pass a young marquis frozen in panic, unsure whether to hand the king's glove with the left hand or the right. A duchess faints elegantly upon realizing her invitation to the next ball was addressed to Madame instead of Madame la Duchesse. The stakes are absurd and deadly serious. This, of course, is by design. Louis has transformed Versailles into a gilded cage, and the nobility into its brightest songbirds. Once powerful lords now spend their days vying for the honour of holding a candlestick or folding the king's nightgown. Removed from their ancestral lands and busy with the theatre of proximity, they pose no threat to the crown. Some historians debate whether this was brilliance or manipulation. Was Louis protecting the state from feudal chaos, or simply feeding his ego with endless praise? Perhaps both. But there's no doubt that the court, in all its splendour, dances to a rhythm composed by one man alone. You linger near the Salon de Mars, where rumours travel faster than light. A whisper about a mistress's cough becomes news of a pregnancy. A misplaced fan suggests scandal. One evening, you overhear a conversation, half serious, half performance, about who had the privilege of closing the king's bed curtains that morning. The winner beams for days. It is here that the king's mistresses, too, become fixtures of the realm. Madame de Montespan, fiery and sharp, commands attention as easily as she wears jewels. Her apartments rival those of queens. Later, Madame de Maintenon, quiet and devout, soothes the aging monarch with scripture and softness. These women do not merely charm, they influence. They shape patronage, influence foreign alliances, and steer royal moods. And yet, even love is structured. Louis insists on ceremony for everything, even private visits. A secret staircase allows him to move discreetly between chambers, but nothing at Versailles remains truly secret for long. Gossip flows like perfume. As you walk the corridors one late afternoon, you notice that even the gardens seem to participate. Hedges twist into shapes of classical myths. Statues peer knowingly at passing couples. The fountains seem to burst more joyfully when the king appears. Though you know the servants are simply responding to cues, it's all a grand illusion, but a beautiful one. Still, behind the gold, time marches. Louis's once black hair is greying, his legs ache. He leans more often on advisers, and even more on silence. Yet the court remains tireless, spinning like a carousel of candles and fans. One lady-in-waiting murmurs that no one sleeps at Versailles, they merely dim. In these later years, the king becomes increasingly religious. He banishes Protestants with the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, a move that shocks much of Europe. Thousands flee, skilled artisans, traders, and scholars leave France behind. The king sees it as purification. Historians, later, would call it a loss. You pass through a chapel where he prays daily. The air is thick with incense and echoes. His velvet cloak sweeps the marble as he kneels. For all his splendour, his shoulders seem smaller here. Versailles may be a court of mirrors, but even mirrors cannot hold back time. The parties grow quieter, the gowns a little heavier, the gossip tinged with worry. And as you pause beside the flickering candle of a half-asleep servant, you understand beneath the laughter and gold. Versailles is a machine powered by people, desire, and ritual, and it has run at full pace for decades. Soon, something must slow, but not yet. Tonight, the court dances again. You awaken in the gentle hush before dawn, the palace still wrapped in velvet shadows. Versailles is quieter now. The edges of its glory softened, but its rituals remain intact. Louis XIV, once radiant with youth and ceremony, now walks with a slower pace. His wig is heavier, his limbs stiffer, and his once boundless energy turns inward. Yet the palace still pulses with life, a strange blend of grandeur and grief. The royal family has become a labyrinth of Louises. You wander the royal quarters and pass portraits of sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons, each painted in similar posture, each bearing the name Louis. They blur together in curls and satin, like echoes of the king himself refracted through time. But despite this abundance, the Bourbon future is uncertain. By the early 1700s, death has crept into the bloodline. Louis XIV's eldest son, the Grand Dauphin, dies in 1711. The following year, the Dauphin's son, the Duke of Burgundy, dies too, followed swiftly by his own young son, the Duke of Brittany. One after another, heirs vanish like mist. Each loss is met with solemn masses and dark veils. And yet Versailles carries on, as though trying to outpace mortality. You pause beside a fireplace where courtiers speak in hushed tones. One wonders if the king is cursed. Another suggests that God punishes the court's vanity. A third dares whisper that too much incense has spoiled the lungs of Bourbon heirs. Historians still speculate. Was it illness? Was it medical error? Did court physicians, clinging to bloodletting and purging, do more harm than help? Perhaps, but no records can bring the lost princes back. And so, the Bourbon future is pinned to a child, the Duke of Anjou, Louis XIV's great-grandson, just 5 years old. He plays with marionettes in a side room while ministers debate his tutors. The boy will one day become Louis XV, but for now, he barely understands his lineage. You follow Louis XIV on a walk through the gardens, slower now, more reflective. His eyes are sunken, and his gait uneven, but he still dresses with precision. A courtier offers him an arm. He refuses. Even in age, he performs kingship with every breath. One morning, he calls his great-grandson to his chamber. You watch from a corner as he speaks, his voice papery but firm. "Do not imitate me in war," he says. "Try to keep the peace I have so dearly gained." It is a moment both touching and conflicted. Louis has waged war for decades, reshaping Europe in his image, but perhaps, at the end, he sees the weight he leaves behind. His final days are spent in a chair by the window, wrapped in furs, gazing out at the avenues he built. The fountains are still running, the statues still gleam, but the Sun King's light is fading. When he dies in September 1715, he has ruled France for 72 years, the longest reign in European history at the time. The court weeps, though some quietly exhale. You join the slow procession of mourners moving through the Hall of Mirrors. The chandeliers are dimmed. The polished floors no longer sparkle. One nobleman removes his hat with trembling fingers and says, almost to himself, "We will never see his like again." And perhaps they won't. Louis XIV leaves behind a kingdom both mighty and strained, a court both legendary and exhausting, and a name that will glow in history's scrolls like the sun he styled himself after. The crown, heavy and warm from decades of wear, now passes to the child king, Louis XV, and Versailles holds its breath. You awaken to the distant laughter of a child echoing through a palace too large for his small footsteps. It is 1715 and Louis XV is just 5 years old, wide-eyed, shy, and blissfully unaware of the weight now resting invisibly upon his shoulders. Versailles feels strange, like a grand machine winding itself up again after a long pause. The Sun King is gone, and in his place stands silence and a question. What now? France is weary. The wars have been long, the taxes heavy, and the nobles anxious. The court looks toward the child king with a mix of hope and skepticism. And so, power once again slips into careful adult hands, this time into those of the Duke of Orléans, who serves as regent until Louis XV comes of age. You drift through the regent's apartments, overhearing conversations of reform. There is talk of loosening the court's grip, of tolerating Protestant voices, of easing the burdens of Versailles. For a moment, France breathes a little easier, and Louis he plays. He rides ponies, learns to read with a tutor named Fleury, and grows up surrounded by gardens, card games, and courtly gazes. The shadow of his great-grandfather looms, but no one expects him to shine so brightly. He is quieter, softer, less Apollo, more moonlight. By 1723 he is declared of age, the regency ends, and Fleury, the gentle tutor-turned-cardinal, becomes the real power behind the throne. This is a different sort of rule. Fleury avoids spectacle. He is frugal where the Sun King was extravagant. Under his guidance, France avoids major wars, pays down debts, and sees its economy begin to mend. He lowers taxes, he funds canals, farmers prosper. The people begin calling Louis XV le bien-aimé, the beloved. You stroll beside the king in the palace gardens. He is 20 now, tall and polite, with an air of calm that many find refreshing. He does not hunger for grandeur the way his predecessor did. In fact, he avoids attention when he can. He prefers the forest. You find him one morning at the edge of a royal hunting lodge, smiling slightly at a herd of deer in the mist. He is most at peace among trees and birdsong. He sketches quietly, feeds breadcrumbs to finches, and collects small mechanical toys. His interest in clocks, keys, and locks grows. One servant quips that the king knows more about hinges than about policy, and here, too, history finds its questions. Was Louis XV simply too private for such a public role? Did his introversion become indifference? Scholars still debate whether he withdrew from responsibility or simply governed in a quieter key. One thing is clear: he rarely intervenes in court intrigue. He signs what is placed before him. Fleury runs the kingdom until his death in 1743, by which time Louis XV is already over 30. And now, for the first time, the king must truly rule. He begins with confidence. The War of the Austrian Succession ignites across Europe, and France joins eagerly. Early victories excite the court. Versailles hosts balls, operas, and victories turned into verse. But the war drags on. The treasury tightens. The enthusiasm dims. Louis begins to retreat, not from the battlefield, but from the spotlight. You now spend more time with him at his private residence, the Petit Trianon, tucked away in the Versailles gardens. It is smaller, quieter, and filled with clocks. He escapes here not only from politics, but from the burden of image. No more sun motifs, no more choreographed risings. Instead, there is intimacy and complication. The court now revolves around his mistresses, particularly Madame de Pompadour, whose intelligence and charm will come to define an era. But for now, the king remains elusive. He is the monarch who prefers shadows, a ruler less interested in lighting the stage than in slipping out the side door. Versailles begins to change. The fountains still flow, the chandeliers still glisten, but something softer has taken hold, a hush after the storm. Louis XV, once the beloved, is now a puzzle, and France waits to see what he will become. You awaken to the gentle clink of porcelain and the scent of warm pastries in the morning light. It is the 1750s, and Versailles has taken on a new rhythm, less thunderous, more refined. In this softer court, one figure begins to shine not for her crown, but for her presence, Madame de Pompadour. You walk the corridors now not behind kings and cardinals, but behind a woman who wields power with poise, perfume, and paper. Her name is Jeanne Antoinette Poisson, born a commoner, raised with care, educated with purpose, and, according to some whispers, guided by a prophecy that she would one day capture the king's heart. And she does. She becomes not just his mistress, but his companion, his confidant, and his cultural compass. You stroll with her through the gardens of the Petit Trianon, where she hums softly and gestures at the placement of marble urns. Art flourishes around her. She commissions painters, sponsors architects, and promotes artisans from the Sèvres porcelain factory. Her tastes define an entire era of Rococo elegance. Pastel curves, gentle swans, delicate cups, and mythological nymphs lounging in gilded frames. To walk Versailles now is to step into her vision. Her influence goes beyond beauty. She advises on policy, especially in matters of diplomacy and education. She reads political pamphlets and philosophical treatises. She corresponds with Voltaire. She promotes Enlightenment thinkers, though carefully, quietly, as France is still wary of ideas that sparkle too brightly. Historians still debate her true influence. Was she merely decorative, or was she one of the most powerful women in France? The truth may lie in her archives, full of letters in her elegant hand, addressing ministers, artists, and occasionally the king himself, always measured, always deliberate. You see Louis XV with her often, not in public displays of passion, but in shared walks, long conversations, and evenings playing cards by the fire. Their romance fades, but their friendship deepens. When she is ill, he visits often. When she dies in 1764 after years of illness, he grieves in silence and avoids court for days. Her portrait remains in his chambers until his own death. The palace, once ruled by the sun, now drifts through gentle twilight. You walk past a new salon named in her honor, the Salon de Pompadour, and feel the shift Versailles has taken. It is no longer a center of thunderous policy or grand declarations. It is a place of reflection, of painted panels and poetry. Yet outside these walls, France is stirring. You hear it in the salons of Paris, where philosophers speak of reason, equality, and freedom. You hear it in the cafes where pamphlets are read aloud and debated. The Enlightenment is blooming, and Versailles, though late to listen, cannot ignore it forever. The king is aging, his decisions are fewer, his interest in state matters waning. One courtier remarks that Louis has become a man of routine, the same wine, the same cars, the same conversations. Even his mistresses, once scandalous, now seem ceremonial. But Pompadour's legacy lives on, in the art, in the thinkers she supported, and in the quiet evolution of the court. A generation raised on her style and subtlety will go on to shape France in ways no one can yet imagine. As you pass beneath an arched ceiling painted with clouds and cherubs, you find a small plaque she had installed. Without me, the king is but a man. It's not boastful. It's true in the quietest, most human way. For a time, she was the bridge between absolute power and something softer, something thoughtful. And in this warm afternoon glow, as Versailles whispers with perfume and parchment, the echoes of her influence drift gently through the air. You awaken to footsteps behind velvet walls, light, hurried, and strangely muffled. It is the 1760s, and Versailles is no longer just a palace of grandeur. It has become a palace of secrets. The Hall of Mirrors still gleams, the gardens still bloom, but behind closed doors, quiet networks of rumour, espionage, and silent gestures form the true language of court life. You wander through a lesser-known hallway, one not listed on any official map, and find a hidden door, one of many that lace the palace like veins. These concealed passages allow nobles, servants, and even the king to move unseen, bypassing protocol and prying eyes. The palace, once a theatre of open ritual, now thrives on whispers. Here, you notice the new etiquette of silence fans snap shut with coded messages. Snuff boxes click in particular rhythms, and glances exchanged across dinner tables hold entire conversations. One noblewoman raises a handkerchief and two ministers disappear into a side room. No one acknowledges it. Everyone understands. It's not just gossip, it's politics in disguise. Court factions rise and fall with dizzying speed. There are those aligned with the Jesuits, others with Enlightenment thinkers, still others loyal only to themselves. The king, Louis XIV, seems distant, present, but elusive. He remains the centre of court, yet increasingly detached, observing rather than participating. And into this vacuum slips a new tide of informants, pamphleteers, and foreign agents. You pass a valet carrying a sealed letter, its wax already tampered with. Behind him, a maid whispers in Italian to a man who pretends to admire a tapestry. One night, you overhear two nobles arguing over the authorship of a scandalous book, The Private Life of Louis IV, rumoured to be written by someone within these very walls. Historians still debate the extent to which Louis knew or cared about these layers of intrigue. Was he indifferent, or simply resigned? Had the machine of court outgrown his control? Some suggest he allowed the rumours to flourish as a way to distract from larger matters. Others say he simply didn't want to know. The secret correspondence of this period is vast. Letters coded with lemon juice, inkwells that twist to reveal hidden compartments, even a few mirrors, you're told, that were said to record sound. Most of these tales are fanciful, but not all. In the library, you find a volume annotated with strange marks. A scholar nearby explains that they're marginalia from Madame du Barry's tutor, part lesson, part intelligence record. Du Barry, the king's final mistress, has stirred the court into fresh motion. Some resent her common birth, others envy her access. Everyone watches her. Even Louis's own children tread carefully. The Dauphin, often reserved, dislikes the court's theatricality. He prefers books and walks in the rain. You see him staring out a window one morning, watching a group of courtiers rehearsing a comedy. He doesn't smile, but there is a sharpness in him, a seriousness. And beyond him, a new generation waits, thoughtful, educated, skeptical. They were raised with Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu under their pillows. They question the world that Versailles represents, even as they dress its part. You walk through a salon where the paintings seem to argue with one another on one wall, an allegory of divine monarchy, on the opposite, a delicate sketch of rural labourers, idealised, noble, and free. It is as though the palace itself has begun to doubt its own story. A soft rain falls over the gardens, and you pause beside the fountain of Latona. The statue depicts a goddess punished for her pride, turned to stone mid-prayer. A servant whispers that some at court think it symbolic of Versailles, once divine, now slowly petrifying. And perhaps they're right. The palace still gleams, still dances. But beneath the surface, something fragile quivers, the sense that this elaborate performance cannot go on forever. You leave the hidden passage and return to the main corridor, where laughter and powdered wigs still fill the space. but you notice the mirrors have begun to crack. You awaken to the faint scratch of quills and the rustle of philosophical debate. It is the late 1760s, and France is no longer content to whisper behind doors. It is thinking, loudly. In Paris salons, illuminated by flickering oil lamps and thick with smoke and speculation, the Enlightenment burns brightly. But here at Versailles, the light is filtered through lace curtains. The ideas arrive, eventually, but in softened form. You wander through the palace library, where shelves are now lined with new names: Rousseau, Diderot, Montesquieu. Their volumes are bound in soft calfskin and quietly passed from courtier to courtier, dog-eared and occasionally hidden beneath more respectable texts. A countess reads the social contract behind a book of poetry. A young duke pretends to admire a landscape painting while mentally composing a treatise on justice. The world outside Versailles is swelling with new questions. What is freedom? What is equality? Does power truly come from divine right, or from the people in the salons of Paris? Philosophers gather to explore these questions with wit and wine, debating the very foundations of monarchy while dressed in embroidered waistcoats. Here in Versailles, those ideas trickle in slowly, nervously, like water into a cracked porcelain vase. The court still dances, perfume still clouds the air, but there is a new unease beneath the powder. Courtiers speak more carefully. Ministers redact their correspondence. Even the king, Louis XIV, seems to sense the tension rising. You see it in his furrowed brow during council meetings, in his longer silences during royal suppers. One afternoon, a pamphlet appears, anonymously published but clearly dangerous. It calls for rational reform, for the rights of man, for the end of inherited privilege. The guards confiscate a few copies, but within days, hand-copied versions spread through the court, tucked into sleeves and coat pockets. You overhear a conversation near the Galerie des Batailles. The king is out of step with the age, a marquis says. The world is changing. Another replies, then let us make sure we walk more slowly. Historians still debate whether Louis XV understood the depth of what was coming. Was he merely cautious or truly unaware? His policies in these years remain hesitant. Some minor reforms here, a few tax changes there, but no real shift in power. He holds tightly to tradition, even as the ground beneath begins to shift. You find a quiet room filled with scientific instruments, telescopes, globes, measuring rods. A young noble explains gravity with a sense of reverence once reserved for divine right. The world is rational, he says. It must be governed rationally. And yet, court life remains ornate. Balls are thrown. New dresses are debuted. A chamber orchestra rehearses a symphony with such delicacy you can feel it through your shoes. But now, the applause feels more mechanical. You attend a masquerade one evening. Behind the velvet masks and gilded smiles, the laughter is brittle. One guest dresses as truth, another as liberty. It is meant to amuse, and yet it unsettles. These figures once belonged only to paintings and allegories. Now they walk the halls. In a side gallery, you find an unfinished portrait of the king. The artist has not yet painted the eyes. They are hollow ovals, staring blankly from a face that looks weary. The brush is still wet, the air thick with linseed oil and something quieter doubt. Louis XV, once le bien-aimé, the beloved, is now often called le mal-aimé, the unloved. His charm has faded, his delays has drawn criticism, his distance once seen as refinement, now feels like retreat. France is beginning to imagine life beyond him, and while Versailles continues its rituals, the clock is ticking, not just in the salons, but in the minds of those who have begun to wonder, what if the king was not necessary at all? You awaken to the steady ticking of an ornate clock. The year is 1770 and the palace has grown stiller, its grandeur beginning to feel like habit rather than heart. Louis XIII's reign wanes like a fading candle, flickering but reluctant to go out. But the air within Versailles is stirred by new breath, that of his grandson and heir, Louis Auguste, the future Louis XVI. You find the young Dauphin in a workshop tucked quietly behind one of the palace's countless salons. He is surrounded not by courtiers, but by gears, lathes, and brass instruments. He leans over a tiny lock mechanism, his face smudged with oil, utterly focused. For a prince raised in golden brocade, he prefers the company of tools. He is quiet, diligent, and physically awkward. At first glance, he seems almost too gentle for a kingship, too soft-spoken, too slow to form words. But there is an earnestness in him that is impossible to ignore. You notice how carefully he listens, how he never interrupts, how he often tilts his head when thinking, as though measuring the angles of a problem before speaking. He is not his grandfather, not flamboyant, not mysterious, not surrounded by lovers and masks. He is, in some ways, the opposite of Versailles itself, unadorned, sincere, awkwardly authentic. His education is thorough, perhaps overly so. He studies Latin, geography, astronomy, and history. He knows the names of rivers and stars. He can explain how tides work. He writes with neat penmanship and reads the works of Enlightenment philosophers, though with caution. You see him studying Rousseau, brow furrowed, lips pressed thin. But his real passion lies in mechanics. He spends hours dismantling clocks, crafting miniature keys, and examining globes with a craftsman's admiration. When he receives an English lock as a gift, he takes it apart that same evening and improves it by morning. A valet jokes that if not born royal, the Dauphin might have been a very content locksmith. At Versailles, such hobbies draw confusion. Nobles wonder aloud why a future king is interested in hinges and springs. One whispers, he'll fix the locks but never open the doors. Still, Louis Auguste is not entirely alone in his peculiarities. He is soon to marry, and across the border in Vienna, a young archduchess prepares for a life of unfamiliar rituals and French perfume. Her name is Marie Antoinette. She is 15 when she arrives at the French court in 1770, powdered, painted, and smiling through practiced diplomacy. Their union is strategic, part of a long tradition of alliances between France and Austria. At their first meeting, she curtsies, he bows. They exchange shy words. She is playful, charming, and visibly nervous. He is courteous, but stiff. They are, in many ways, mismatched, not just as individuals, but as symbols. Antoinette brings with her music, laughter, and a taste for fashion. Louis brings awkward silences and polite sincerity. They try to make it work, and for a time, they do. Clumsily, slowly. You drift through a corridor where Antoinette's new maids unpack ribbons and lace from crates marked with imperial seals. A nearby chamber is filled with Austrian musicians rehearsing Mozart. The court listens politely, though some squint at the harpsichord as if it has arrived from another planet. The young couple becomes the subject of intense scrutiny. Versailles, ever obsessed with ceremony, judges their every glance, word, and delay in producing an heir. Years pass. Whispers grow. Their marriage becomes a question mark. Historians still debate the reasons for this delay. Medical speculation abounds. Some suggest Louis was simply too timid or physically unsure. Others blame the overwhelming pressures of royal expectation. Whatever the cause, it becomes fuel for satire. Pamphlets appear in Paris, rude drawings, biting verses, mocking cartoons. The Dauphin is lampooned for his chastity, Antoinette for her youth and foreignness. The press, once deferential, is becoming bold, and yet you see in them something ordinary, two young people trying to grow into impossible roles. One evening, you find Louis Auguste walking alone in the gardens, his hands behind his back, his head bowed. He pauses beneath a yew tree and studies a watch in his palm, not just to tell time, but to admire its construction. You wonder what he is thinking, perhaps of his future crown, perhaps of gears and balance wheels. He may not yet realize it, but France is beginning to pull at its seams, and soon the weight of those seams will fall upon him. For now, he remains the Dauphin, bookish, awkward, and unaware that the locks he loves to craft may never secure the kingdom he is destined to rule. You awaken to the clatter of carriage wheels and the faint rustle of lace. It is May of 1770, and the roads to Versailles are lined with curious onlookers. The air is warm, and the sun glints off the glass windows of a gilded coach. Inside, a 15-year-old girl presses her gloved fingers to the velvet lining and tries not to fidget. Her name is Marie Antoinette, daughter of Empress Maria Theresa, Archduchess of Austria, and now the future Queen of France. You ride with her as the forests thin and the golden towers of Versailles rise in the distance. She is beautiful, lively, and eager, but behind her smile, a knot of nerves tightens. At the border, she has already been stripped of her Austrian clothes, her letters, her dog, and her name. A ritual of transformation into something French. She crossed a threshold not only of geography, but of identity. The wedding takes place with immense pomp, held in the royal chapel of Versailles. You float above the ceremony, the gold-trimmed altar, the perfumed courtiers, the nervous groom and the radiant bride. Louis Auguste, awkward but dutiful, offers his arm. Antoinette curtsies. They exchange vows beneath a vault of angels. The public celebrations are loud, joyful, and tragic. In Paris, a fireworks display meant to honour the couple ends in disaster when a crowd panics and hundreds are trampled. The royal family is not present, but the news reaches them quickly. Some whisper it's a bad omen. In her early years at Versailles, Antoinette tries to adapt. She's instructed on French court etiquette, a world of endless bows, whispered hierarchies, and unforgiving scrutiny. She learns that even her smiles are measured. Her morning dressing ritual is attended by a dozen women, each with their own rank. One must pass her chemise, another her corset, and heaven forbid the order be broken. She chafes under these rules. You catch glimpses of her sneaking out of her apartments without an entourage, laughing with her ladies-in-waiting, improvising dances in quiet corners of the palace. Her personality, bold, youthful, effervescent, begins to clash with the formality expected of a future queen. She creates her own retreat, the Petit Trianon. You wander there beside her, a neoclassical jewel hidden within the vast gardens of Versailles. Here, she escapes the theatre of court. She hosts small gatherings, plays music, and eventually builds a miniature village, complete with a dairy, mill, and garden. She dresses in muslin, tends to sheep with some assistance, and dreams of simplicity. To some, this is charming. To others, it is scandalous. Rumours begin to swirl. The Queen is frivolous. The Queen is foreign. The Queen plays at being a shepherdess while the people go hungry. Pamphlets begin to circulate, libelles, crude and biting, portraying her as vain, wasteful, unfaithful. She is nicknamed Madame Deficit. Some accuse her of controlling her husband. Others say she controls nothing at all. Historians still debate how much truth lies in these rumours. Was she reckless with money, or simply the victim of exaggerated satire? Did she wield political influence? Or was she merely a symbol to be used and abused by factions? You observe her closely one evening, standing at a balcony alone, her silhouette framed by moonlight. The palace hums behind her, but she is still. A letter from her mother lies open on her desk, a reprimand, urging her to be more dignified, more serious, more royal. In truth, she's still very young, and at her side, Louis remains distant but loyal. After years of awkward delays, they finally conceive. Their first child is born in 1778. Relief floods the court, an heir, a promise of continuity. A queen restored to favour, if only briefly. But outside Versailles, things are changing fast. The American Revolution begins. France, eager to humble Britain, offers support, soldiers, ships, and silver flow across the Atlantic. The war is costly, and the debts mount. Ministers try to explain this to the king, but he dislikes conflict. He delays, defers, hesitates. Louis is kind, well-meaning, but in these moments, kindness is not enough. And Marie, she smiles and waves. She attends operas. She kisses her children's foreheads and wears ever taller hairstyles. She still believes in the role she was given. But far beyond the fountains of Versailles, the people of France are beginning to ask whether that role, whether any of it, truly belongs. You awaken to a quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels heavy. It is the early 1780s, and Versailles is glowing as always. But the glow feels disconnected, like candlelight in a storm. Beneath the grand ceilings and carefully powdered wigs, there is a kind of nervous rhythm to life at court. You walk the galleries where nobles whisper behind painted fans and try to pretend the air is not changing. Outside the gates, France is in trouble. Bread prices are rising. Harvests have failed again. The people are hungry, angry, and tired of watching carts stacked with fine cakes and oranges pass through their towns on their way to Versailles. You see them along the roads, caps pulled low, faces drawn, muttering about taxes, tithes, and the price of flour. Inside the palace, Antoinette strolls through the gardens in a silk gown sewn by her personal dressmaker. She smiles, but the smile is thin. Rumours cling to her like smoke. Even her moments of generosity, donations to hospitals, sponsorship of orphans, are buried under headlines of gambling debts and pearls. One day, you overhear a gardener saying she ordered a fresh shipment of white roses while the nearby village had run out of bread. You're not sure if it's true, but the story spreads. The people don't need facts. They need someone to blame. You drift into a council chamber where Louis XVI sits surrounded by ministers and ledgers. His brow furrows. His fingers drum on the table. He knows France is bleeding money. His advisors offer solutions, tax reforms, cuts to the nobility's privileges, fiscal restraint. He hesitates. He agrees, then retracts. He calls new ministers, then dismisses them. Turgot, then Necker, then Calonne. Each tries to fix the kingdom's books. Each fails, not for lack of talent, but for lack of royal resolve. Louis cannot or will not fight the entrenched interests of the aristocracy. He seeks compromise, but finds only gridlock. Historians still debate whether Louis was indecisive or simply overwhelmed. Was he trying to protect the monarchy or trying not to be the king who lit the fuse? You walk with him through the halls of the Petit Trianon. He talks of clocks, of a new locking mechanism he's working on. He's proud of it. It's clever. But you wonder if he knows his kingdom is slipping through the very locks he cherishes. Meanwhile, Antoinette becomes more reclusive. She spends her time with her children, especially her son, the Dauphin, and her daughter, Madame Royale. She hosts fewer balls. She smiles less. Her health wanes, yet the pamphlets grow crueler. One caricature shows her dancing in a fountain of coins. Another implies she conspired with Austria against France. The most famous accusation, the affair of the diamond necklace, wasn't her fault, not really. But the scandal sticks. A forged letter, a stolen fortune, a trial of fools. And in the end, the Queen's reputation is ruined further. The people believe she wanted the diamonds. They believe she said, "Let them eat cake." She didn't, but it doesn't matter. You stand beside her one evening as she watches a performance in the Royal Theatre. The laughter of the courtiers rings hollow. She adjusts her gloves slowly, almost mechanically. A letter from her mother in Vienna lies unread on her table. The Empress has passed away. Marie Antoinette is no longer anyone's daughter, just a queen in a gilded cage. And yet the palace continues its routine. Servants light candles. Musicians rehearse minuets. A new shipment of silk arrives from Lyon. A nobleman fusses over the ruffle placement on his waistcoat. You hear someone say, France cannot change. It is too elegant to fall. But in Paris, the crowds grow louder. Graffiti appears along the city walls. Pamphlets multiply. Soap makers and stonemasons begin discussing philosophy. People gather to listen to speeches in cafes, debating Rousseau and Montesquieu with fire in their voices. The fountains of Versailles still flow, the salons still shine, but in the village streets, someone scrawls on a tavern wall, "If there's no bread, we'll eat the rich." You awaken to the sound of distant thunder, but there are no clouds in the sky. It is July, 1789. The air is thick and restless. You feel it in the cobblestones of Paris, in the tremble of carriage wheels, in the silence of guards who clutch their muskets tighter than usual. The storm is not of weather, but of people. You are no longer inside Versailles. You are on the streets of the capital. A rumour has taken root the king is gathering troops, not to protect Paris, but to crush its rising voice. Bread is scarce. Wages are stagnant. The Estates General, called earlier that year for the first time in over 170 years, has become a forum of debate and defiance. The Third Estate, the common people, have begun to speak in ways that are no longer humble. Then comes the spark. On July 14th, a crowd swarms the Bastille, an old medieval fortress, half prison, half symbol of royal tyranny. The guards resist. Shots are fired. Smoke rises. You stand near the river and see men and women tearing stones from the streets, hauling cannons, scaling walls. It is chaos, not orchestrated, not orderly, but focused with terrible clarity. By evening, the Bastille falls. Its governor is seized. His head is paraded on a pike. The fortress itself will soon be dismantled, stone by stone, as though Paris is physically erasing its chains. You drift through the crowd, past the wine sellers handing out drinks, the pamphleteers screaming themselves hoarse, and the children dancing in puddles of soot. This is no minor protest. It is a shift, irreversible, profound. Back in Versailles, news arrives slowly, then all at once. Louis XVI is told of the storming. He is stunned. Is it a revolt, he asks. No, sire, replies the Duke of La Rochefoucauld-Liancourt. It is a revolution. The king does not immediately act. He considers, then changes his mind. He rides into Paris, dons a tricolour cockade, a gesture of unity, and speaks to the crowds. They cheer for a moment, but the tide has turned. Symbols no longer satisfy. Marie Antoinette watches from a window at the Tuileries Palace, where the royal family has been relocated for safety. She clutches her daughter's hand. You see the Queen's posture stiffen. Once the object of admiration, she now hears her name spat with venom on the streets. Austrian, they hiss. Witch, spendthrift, and yet she still holds herself like a queen. In the National Assembly, ideas swirl: liberty, fraternity, equality. Some call for a constitutional monarchy, others call for abolition. A few speak softly of a republic. You sit in the back row, beside a clerk scribbling furiously. His ink runs dry before the speakers do. These are lawyers, farmers, priests, not noble by birth, but noble by conviction. And they are writing the beginning of something entirely new. Outside, people wear the tricolour in their hats. They sing songs once banned. They rename streets, tear down statues, and demand answers. Inside Versailles, the palace begins to empty. Courtiers slip away, quietly. The ceremonies grow smaller, less confident. The halls echo more than they did before. A servant whispers that the fountains have not been run all week. Historians later wonder, could the monarchy have adapted? Could Louis have embraced reform more fully? Earlier, some argue yes, that a timely constitution might have preserved the throne. Others believe it was too late from the beginning. The palace had become too remote, the hunger too deep. In the quiet of a side room, you find Louis XVI bent over a desk, not signing laws, but building a model lock. It clicks shut with mechanical precision. He smiles for a moment before the outside world floods in again, and outside, the people march. Women from the markets walk miles to Versailles, soaked by rain, fueled by anger. They demand bread. They demand the king return to Paris. And he does, reluctantly, uncertainly, his carriage flanked by citizens carrying pikes and singing songs of the revolution. Versailles, the jewel of Bourbon monarchy, is left behind. The royal family will never sleep there again. The sun has not only set on the palace, it has risen on a different France. You awaken in a shadowed chamber where the walls are stone, not silk. It is 1792, and the illusion of monarchy has all but crumbled. You're no longer walking golden halls, but sitting in the hushed gallery of a revolutionary tribunal. Before you stands Louis XVI, no longer King of France and Navarre, but Louis Capet, citizen and prisoner. The room is lit with harsh daylight and the flicker of burning oil. The king's once manicured hands are bound, his clothes are plain, his posture slumped. And yet, his voice, calm, even, echoes clearly as he answers his accusers. They charge him with conspiracy, with tyranny, with betrayal of the nation. The charges are read aloud. The silence is thick. You glance toward the spectators, Jacobins, journalists, merchants, midwives, a patchwork of revolution itself. Some murmur, some weep, others remain still, eyes fixed on the man they had once bowed to. Louis speaks gently in his defense. He denies the intent to spill French blood. He affirms his love for the country. He pleads not as a king, but as a man. Historians still debate whether this was the voice of sincerity or simply habit. Did he mean every word, or was it the echo of old privilege, attempting one last performance before the curtain fell? Ultimately, it does not matter. On January 20th, 1793, the convention votes. By a narrow margin, Louis XVI is condemned to death. You are there, on the cold morning of January 21st, as he is led through the streets of Paris in a closed carriage. The air is colourless. No royal procession, no velvet, no fanfare, only guards, only drums. The scaffold awaits at the Place de la Révolution, formerly Place Louis XV. Crowds gather shoulder to shoulder, some silent, some shouting, a sea of tricolour. The blade of the guillotine gleams faintly under the grey sky. Louis climbs the steps with steadiness. He attempts to speak, to forgive, to explain, to bless the nation, but his words are drowned out by the drum roll. The executioners move quickly, a flash of steel, then silence. It is over in an instant. You feel the collective exhale of a people unsure what they've just done. The head is shown, a cry rises, then confusion, then cheers, then quiet. For many, it is justice, for others, a tragedy, but for all, it is irreversible. Louis XVI, a man of clocks, maps, keys, and hesitation, is no more. At the Tuileries Palace is Marie Antoinette hears the news. Her eyes close. Her daughter clutches her arm. Her young son, Louis Charles, is too young to understand, but others do. They know the Queen will be next. Antoinette is moved to the conciergerie. You find her in a small stone cell, hair cut short, clothing plain, surrounded by the scent of mildew and the faint sound of river water beneath the floorboards. Still, she carries herself with grace. She writes letters, prays quietly, and endures the insults of guards with silent dignity. Her trial begins in October. The charges are broad, venomous, treason, extravagance, corruption, even unthinkable accusations concerning her son. She denies the charges calmly. When accused of unnatural crimes against her child, she says only, "I appeal to all mothers." The courtroom falls briefly silent. On October 16th, 1793, she too is led to the guillotine. Gone are the powdered wigs and jewels. She wears a plain white dress and a small bonnet. Her back is straight. She does not resist. A jolt of quietness follows her execution. No music, no mourning. The revolution does not stop. It accelerates. Versailles, once the crown of European power, now stands empty, a museum of echoes. You wander its deserted salons. The mirrors no longer reflect royalty. The chandeliers gather dust. A footman's cap lies forgotten under a bench. The fountains are dry. The gardens grow wild. The Bourbons are gone, not just overthrown, dismantled. France is no longer a monarchy. It is something new, uncertain, turbulent, and still taking shape. But the story of kings does not end so easily. In the corners of cafes and the quiet of chapels, there are those who still whisper the name Bourbon. They believe, someday, the crown will return. For now, however, only silence reigns. You awaken to wind stirring through long, abandoned curtains. Versailles is quiet now, not the stillness of sleep but of vacancy. The mirrors reflect only dust. The marble floors echo with no footsteps but your own. The laughter, the politics, the rituals, all gone, as though the palace has exhaled and emptied itself. The Bourbon monarchy, once the golden pillar of France, has fallen. You drift slowly through the grand gallery, past portraits that now seem to look away. Louis XIV still beams from his frame, arm outstretched in theatrical command. Louis XV gazes gently beside a table of scientific instruments, and Louis XVI, quiet, reluctant, misunderstood, appears with a book in one hand and a distant look in his eyes. None of them speak, and yet they still seem to whisper. The revolution has swept away the crowns, but not the memory. As you trace your fingers along the faded embroidery of an old curtain, you feel that history is not made only of rulers and rebels, but of everything in between: the candlelit breakfasts, the anxious gazes during council, the soft click of a lock turned by a king who loved metal more than power. Outside the palace walls, the France of 1794 teeters between reform and terror. The guillotine, once a tool of justice, now hums with blood. The very revolution that tore down the monarchy begins to devour its own leaders. Robespierre rises, then falls. Names are erased, statues toppled, dates rewritten, and still, somewhere far away, in exile or hiding, the Bourbon bloodline breathes. You now visit the room once belonging to the Dauphin, the little boy, Louis Charles, declared Louis XVI by royalists after his father's execution. He never rules. He is held in captivity, isolated, neglected, and dies at the age of 10. His death is quiet. No crowd, no funeral, just the disappearance of a child who bore a crown too heavy to carry. Yet even his death carries weight. Monarchists mourn, Republicans defend. Historians still argue whether the boy who died was the true Louis Charles at all, or whether he was switched in secret, his identity hidden to preserve a royal future, a mystery, unresolved, buried beneath politics and time. You turn a corner and find yourself once again in the Hall of Mirrors. The candles are gone, the chandeliers unlit, and yet, in your mind, you see at the court assembled, the king's measured steps, the glint of gold against velvet. You hear laughter, real and performed. You hear arguments about etiquette and sugar imports and the proper way to bow when the Queen passes. You hear the ticking of the clock Louis XVI designed. You hear Marie Antoinette humming softly to her children in a quiet wing of the palace. You're surrounded not by ghosts, but by echoes. And though the monarchy is no longer here, its traces remain in law, in legend, in limestone. France will go on to crown and uncrown emperors, to restore and abandon kings, to redefine itself again and again. But none will quite match the performance or the collapse of the Bourbons. Not like this. Not with velvet so thick and mirrors so proud. Now, my dear listener, as the last candle flickers low in the palace of your mind, it is time to rest. You've walked through over 2 centuries of elegance and unravelling, of silks and sawdust, of kings who danced and kings who disappeared. You've heard the whispers behind brocade curtains, the rustling of letters that shaped wars, and the silence after the blade fell. History does not sleep, but you can. Let the golden halls fade into soft darkness. Let the fountains fall silent, and the carriages roll away. The court has retired for the night. The mirrors have gone still. The gilded shoes are tucked under chairs. The powdered wigs set gently on their stands. All that remains now is breath and memory. You have wandered through the rise and fall of the House of Bourbon, through every shadow and shimmer, through every corridor and crown, and now you may lay your head down as the palace sleeps beside you. You are safe. You are still. You are drifting. Good night, my dear listener.